Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Leanna Senior Transition Support, specialists in downsizing and seniors residences.
And good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed. My name is Matt Del Vecchio, specializing in life transitions, downsizing in the senior living industry.
And I'm Corey Surratt, a clinical social worker and psychotherapist specializing in grief and loss.
Coming right up on the first half of today's show, why some families have decided to pack it in and move from the city to more tranquil grounds. We'll be talking to a family that did just that. Now, I have to start off the show, Corey. Yeah, it seems to be someone's birthday today, Corey. Happy birthday. Well deserved and looking as young as ever, I have to say.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's really very sweet of you. It's been a really interesting day because if people realize it or not, this is the second birthday of mine in the pandemic. Which is something, eh? It is. I don't claim that as a claim to fame, folks. Let's hope that this is not a tradition that continues, but it's given that we're now much more used to how to handle things. It's been absolutely lovely, social distance, drop-bys, flowers, all kinds of stuff, and still some surprises to come.
And a ton of birthdays on Facebook there, Corey. My God, Miss Social Media. We have to remind everyone, daylight savings times kicking in tonight, so I guess good news and bad news. We'll lose that hour of sleep, but we'll take the extra hour at the end of the day and a little more sunlight as more and more hope kicks in and the vaccinations start to ramp up. Very encouraging. Spring is around the corner next week. And Corey, did you know that it's a new moon tonight even?
I did not.
Yes,
I did not know that.
Lots of things going on.
Yeah.
What do we have coming up in the second half?
Well, speaking of lots of things going on, we're going to be sharing some of the very interesting challenges faced by social workers in hospitals, but also the heartfelt story of one particular social worker that organized a wedding for a palliative care patient who wanted to marry their longtime partner before they died. That's coming up after the 3:30 news.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. Such an amazing story. Social workers, frontline workers, healthcare workers. Talk about a year that they've had. So looking forward to having Katja on the second half. All right. You know, tens of thousands of people have left Montreal to more suburban and rural areas in the past year. In fact, we're seeing similar trends also in the big cities like Toronto and Vancouver. There was a survey out by Royal LePage, and they recently announced the results of a national poll that they did of those aged between 35 and 45. And in Montreal specifically, 46% of respondents said the pandemic increased their probability of them moving out of the city to a less densely populated region. So this is very real. It's happening throughout. And so you know what? On the line, we have Sean Horan. Sean and his wife, Jackie, and their son packed it up from Westmount, actually, and moved to Hudson last summer. And we're going to hear their story. I think we have Sean on the line. Sean, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Hi.
Hey, Sean, thanks for joining us all the way from Hudson, I have to add.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking a little time. Your story is quite intriguing, and as it turns out, a story of what many families have done. So can you tee it up for us here, Sean? Give us a little bit of background of your family situation prior to the move.
Well, so, I mean, as you mentioned, I have my wife, Jackie, common law spouse, Jackie, and our son, Lou. And we were living in an apartment in Westmount. He at the time was just over a year when the pandemic, or just under a year when the pandemic lockdown started last March. So, you know, we were living in a second floor apartment in Westmount with the three of us, and with hopes of expanding our family down the road as well.
So I'm curious, though, because here, Westmount, great location, middle of the city and all that, hustle bustle. So what were some of the factors that weighed into your decision to move?
Well, I mean, it sort of started off pretty innocently. We felt that we were locked in, right? I mean, everyone was locked in. And, you know, Westmount is a wonderful place, and they have a wonderful community center there, with a pool, tons of different stuff, great activities for kids. But, you know, after the lockdown, we couldn't use any of that stuff. So, you know, we just started innocently. We saw a house on the street next over to ours for sale, And we just kind of, just for fun, took a look. We thought maybe it's a good idea to buy a house during a pandemic. So we didn't really have a clear idea about it, but I think the pandemic kind of sort of really kind of put the writing on the wall for us, and maybe we should move. It's something that Jackie wanted, my girlfriend, wife, I guess, common law spouse, wanted to do, I think, and it sort of just made it much more of a real thing, I think.
It's quite interesting, and I'm talking with Sean Horan and his family, wife and son at the time, made the move from Westmount to Hudson. I believe, Sean, you've got number 2 on the way, don't you?
We do. That's something that we discovered not long after we moved in here. We moved in August, and so in late August we discovered that we had number 2 on the way. That was always in the cart. It was always in the plan for us. But
maybe it was the Hudson Air, Sean.
Well, I think technically when you do the math, the baby's from Westmount.
It's a Westmount baby.
Okay.
I got it. Well, you mentioned Jackie, and I'm sure many couples and families have struggled with the decision to, do we actually do this? Do we do this move? And did you have differing reasons, or did one of you have to convince the others that, you know what, we should do this? How did that work?
Well, I think Jackie was always sort of more, she was more excited to do it, right? I've always lived in big cities, more or less so is she, but I've always lived in big cities, and the idea maybe of moving out of the city was something that made me a little bit nervous. But honestly, when we first started looking, like I said, the first house we visited was on the street over from ours. Definitely not something we could afford, but it got us thinking about different neighborhoods. We looked sort of all over the city of Montreal. We looked, in Montreal West. We looked in NDG. We even looked on the plateau. But a lot of what we saw in terms of what we could afford really forced you to make hard decisions about square footage and space, right? And we knew that we had one already, and we were likely going to have another. So we, just in terms of what was offered in terms of space in the city, wasn't great.
No, I hear you. I remember when my husband and I were thinking about moving, and I grew up in a suburb and he grew up in the city. And that was not so much at all a debate, but it was certainly a discussion, because I was like, well, let's move into the West Island. And he was like, well, I don't know. But then when we started to look at prices and square foot per square foot, etc., we knew that we couldn't afford it. That would be it just didn't make sense. So that's one part of it for sure. But you went you went far. So what went into that? Because that's something. I think it's great, but what was that like? Why the countryside?
Well, so like I said, we started looking everywhere, and one of the ideas that I had in the back of my head is that maybe this is just sort of a temporary thing. Hopefully this COVID thing is a temporary thing. But I thought maybe if we can just I knew that I would be doing my teaching, my work online. So maybe let's just get very far out of the city, and maybe let's live in a cottage for a year or two, and I'll commute to the city when I need to. So one of the things that we did, which sort of helped us settle here where we ended up, is we looked even further. We looked even more rural, which sort of made it less. This sort of, in the end, for us, Hudson seemed like the kind of a compromise between in the woods and in the city.
Just around the corner, Sean.
Well, in a way, right? It's still, with traffic, it could still be an hour's drive, I guess. But.
Well, it's interesting because it must have really put it in perspective, because you really did look in I don't know whether it was the Laurentians or not, but you were looking truly country, and then
in the Laurentians.
In the Laurentians, and this, I guess, is kind of a middle ground. And I believe it was in the summer last year that you bought, and we hear the stories now with real estate. My wife Stephanie's in real estate. She just sold a home in Beaconsfield. Just craziness, multi-offers, way above asking, and it's quite hectic. She's on the road now with a young couple, and what do you advise a young couple? But at the time, so we're looking summer last year, how did that process go when you had to buy?
Well, so I think we got a little bit lucky. I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of people moving out of the city. So when we looked in Hudson, we only ended up making an offer on one place. It was about the third or fourth place that we saw, maybe. But there, at the time, I think that the real estate market in Hudson was really slow. It hadn't yet picked up from the end of the first lockdown. I think they only started showing houses again in maybe mid-April or something. And when we made an offer, I believe it was in early June, it was on a house that had been on the market since March, since the beginning of the pandemic. And it hadn't seen a lot of action, I don't think.
Well, interesting, Sean. I mean, timing is everything. And
I think
although
that's right, yeah.
the pandemic is terrible for a lot of people, look at your family. You ended up picking what turns out to be probably a good time. I'm sure the value in the 1 year of your house has...
lucky, right? I mean, not good management, just good luck.
Well, lucky, but you had the guts to do it as well, So listen, Sean, we're talking with Sean Horan and his family, his wife Jackie, and their son, and soon to be another baby, made the trek from Westmount to Hudson. You know what? You had a ton of experience. We want our listeners to hear. So when we come back from traffic, Sean, we're going to ask you to get your advice to families that may be considering a move.
Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Leanna Senior Transition Support, specialists in downsizing and seniors residency.
We have on the line Sean Horan, who made the move last summer with his family from Westmount to Hudson. Sean, it had to have been a big learning experience, I'm sure, as every move can be. What are some words of advice you would give families who might be considering making this kind of move?
I would say probably just do everything I didn't do. And don't do anything that I did do. So
okay.
We were so disorganized about it. We didn't know what we wanted. We didn't know where we were looking. We didn't know how much we wanted to pay. We didn't know how much we could pay. So, I mean, I think the real advice I would give is that we did a lot of looking on our own. And, people are and real estate agents are very good at having nice photos and presenting a house very well. But, there's code in all these listings. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give is go and get yourself a real estate. When you're on the buying end, it doesn't cost you anything, right? Go and get yourself a real estate agent who knows something about the area that you're looking in, who is able to kind of sift through a lot of this nonsense and understand the code. So I mean, in the end, we had a real estate agent who showed us the house that we wanted to buy, but we didn't ever tell him that this is what we wanted to buy. And so, amazingly, he was able to sort of figure it out for us.
And
I would say get an agent is what I would say.
Get an agent, okay.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure after, by the way, we should give a shout out to Paul. I think, right? Paul LaFlamme, Royal Apache Village. Why not? He introduced us and did a great job. Great guy. And I'm sure you really had to be organized. I mean, let's face it, a move is a lot of work. And once you realize, oh boy, this is actually happening, then really you've got to be super organized to get things done, as I'm sure you did.
I mean, you sort of. I mean, once it becomes a reality, you've kind of closed the transaction. You think, oh, geez, I got to get my furniture out of this apartment that I'm renting. I got to, notify my landlord that I'm going to be moving in a couple months, and I got to, get this stuff out of here and move. It's this necessity.
There's no question. Yeah, there's no question that it's a lot of things. I'm actually kind of curious, though, aside from it being a lot of things, is there anything pandemic specific related about the move, like that you could, off the top of your head, that you can think of? Because it had to be done, I'm sure, a little differently.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right. With the moving, when I've moved in the past, I've sort of been very present, like on the receiving end, right, of the move, and sort of said, hey, that belongs in this room, that belongs over here. And I really try to stay away from, I mean, not that there was anything wrong with the movers, but I just stay away from them, right? You can leave them their space. So I didn't participate in that very much. Buying appliances, I was, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, I think, when it came to these things. But, I went into an appliance store and I was just scared out of my wits to be there.
Right,
And so
sure.
I literally just bought the first appliances that the man offered me. I mean, I'm sure he must have been very happy with me.
I'll take this and that, and I gotta go.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, can I get out of here in 10 minutes?
Yeah,
I imagine.
So I would say, just even visiting houses. I mean,
Right.
I didn't want to spend too much time lingering around. And normally you would want to look in the corners and at the details and check out the cracks in the ceilings and these kind. And I was so nervous about, probably wrongfully so, but just so nervous about not being in the same room as, strangers for too long and not touching anything.
Yeah,
I don't think that a lot of things didn't register for me.
Not
when I was looking at houses either.
No, I'm sure not comfortable at all. Stephanie just had 47 visits at her last property, and it has to be organized every 15 minutes, and because people are worried. So just we've got a text coming in, and I'm also curious as we talk to Sean Horan here, who his family left from Westmount into Hudson. How were your jobs? Were you able to do this, and how were your jobs affected?
So I'll speak for me, and then I'll talk about Jackie, my girlfriend / wife / common law spouse. She laughed at me during the commercial break about that. But
I'm gonna give you the gears, Sean.
It's complicated, right? So my job is I'm a professor at the University of Montreal, and so we were told before the beginning of the school year that this year would, at your option, be online, and perhaps later on they would transition back to some more in-class or live teaching. But I've done all my teaching from my basement. I painted a blackboard on the wall, and I have a camera, and I teach as if I was in a classroom. I mean, I'm not. There's big differences. But
that's very cool.
For me, it didn't have didn't make much of a difference. Jackie's a yoga instructor, and so a lot of the yoga teaching she was doing before the pandemic was in and around where we lived, at least in the city. But she has taught some classes online, but now she's stopped teaching entirely because she's 8 months pregnant. And and eventually she'll get back to it, but I guess you'll have to get back to it here, which will be a different kind of thing, because you wouldn't want to drive into the city just for teach an hour or two.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah, it certainly changes the way one works.
Yeah.
No question.
I mean, her business is perhaps mine is less portable than hers, but I haven't had to go in. And when I do end up having to go back in, I think I'll just try to take the train as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You'll adapt. So that's you're listening to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Corey Sirota with my co-host Matt Del Vecchio, and we are talking to Sean Horan, whose family went from Westmount to Hudson, which is a move in and of itself, but during the pandemic. So that added on an extra dynamic or dimension to it. So here you are, Sean, in Hudson.
Uh-huh.
I know it's beautiful there. I've been to out there a few times for different reasons, and I wanted to know from your perspective: has the new environment resulted in a more peaceful, less stressful way of living?
Absolutely. Just a couple different ways. First, in terms of just practically speaking, there's just when you go to the grocery store. I mean, I went this morning. There were 5 people in the grocery store at 8 o'clock in the morning. So these people around causing you stress about all that stuff. And then just this sort of beautiful pastoral setting that you find yourself in is really relaxing. I mean, Jackie said it. I mean, the woman who sold us the house said this. I feel it as well. It's like I wake up every day and I sort of feel in some ways that I'm on vacation, in the sense that I look out the window and I see, huge tall pine trees and, smell, clean, fresh air. And
And one of
I don't hear sounds of cars or anything like that.
And you know what? And one of the main reasons why you did that, Sean, and I'm glad you're already seeing that. We've got to wrap it up here, Sean. We want to thank you and Jackie for being a trooper in the background there, and congratulations on the new baby, and really want to wish you all the best. And thank you for taking some time here on a Saturday.
Cheers.
All right. Thanks, Sean. That's Sean Horan. He and his wife, Jackie, moved from Westmount to Hudson. Corey, what do we have coming up on the second half?
Coming up on the second half, the challenges faced by social workers in hospitals and a heartfelt story of one particular social worker that arranged a wedding for someone who was in palliative care.